In a time when men were measured by their grit in the speed of their draw, when the West was still wild and law was whatever the strongest man said it was, one woman would rewrite the rules of frontier justice. Before Vietnam, before Korea, before the greatest generation stormed the beaches of Normandy, there was another American war that forged heroes in blood and fire. The Civil War had ended, but its ghost still haunted the Montana Territory of 1878. None more dangerous than Eleanor Sullivan, known to battlefield surgeons as the physician, a woman who could heal with one hand and kill with the other. The Shadow Creek Gang thought they owned these lands. For 6 brutal years, their outlaw band had carved a bloody empire through intimidation and cold-blooded violence, collecting protection money, stealing honest men's silver, and leaving a trail of burning homesteads across 3 territories. Veterans gone rogue, they traded one war for another until they made the deadliest mistake an outlaw can make. They threatened the family of someone who understood that victory sometimes requires patience, precision, and poison. They kidnapped William Sullivan, unaware his mother had spent months meticulously poisoning their only water source. The Shadow Creek Gang saw what they wanted to see: a simple widow struggling to keep her small ranch alive, an easy target to pressure into selling her strategic water rights. What their greedy eyes couldn't see was the shadow behind Eleanor Sullivan's weather-worn smile, the same shadow that had haunted battlefield surgeons during the bloodiest days of the Civil War. The woman who had mastered the botanical science of both healing and killing under artillery fire at Antietam, the legend they called the physician, because if you knew what she was truly capable of, it was already too late. Now, as the Shadow Creek Gang celebrates their latest intimidation at their Hidden Canyon hideout, surrounded by the territory's most ruthless killers, Eleanor Sullivan is exactly where she wants to be. Her carefully cultivated herbs slowly dissolving in their drinking water, invisible to their arrogant eyes. Because sometimes justice demands patience. Sometimes it takes a ghost from the past to bring down an empire. And the Shadow Creek Gang is about to learn why, even years later, hardened soldiers still speak her name in hushed tones around campfires. What would you do if someone threatened your only family? Would you have the courage to fight back against overwhelming odds? The relentless Montana sun beat down mercilessly on Eagle Canyon, turning the sprawling landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. 20 miles outside the small settlement of Providence Springs, a modest ranch house stood in defiant isolation, its weathered wooden structure a testament to frontier determination. Inside, Eleanor Sullivan moved with practiced efficiency, her boots leaving precise tracks in the thin layer of dust that had settled overnight. To anyone watching, she looked like any other frontier widow starting her day, a 42-year-old woman managing her late husband's struggling ranch alone. Nothing remarkable about her faded calico dress, worn boots, or the sun-bleached bonnet that shadowed her features. But Eleanor never stopped watching back, even in the presumed safety of her own home. The wall calendar caught her attention as she prepared morning coffee. 6 months since she'd returned to Providence Springs. 6 months of careful planning, of building her facade, of becoming invisible in plain sight. The tin cup in her hand bore the faded inscription MS, a reminder of her husband Michael's 15 years working this land before a Shadow Creek bullet took him the previous winter. Have you ever hidden your true self from others, presenting only what they expect to see? Eleanor moved to the window, scanning the perimeter of her property with practiced precision. She caught a glimpse of movement in the distance. Riders making their third pass along the property's border this week. Same gang colors, different men. The Shadow Creek Gang was growing bolder. Inside the ranch house, her son William was already at the kitchen table, his pencil moving across paper with quick, determined strokes. At 19, William Sullivan carried himself with the thoughtful intensity of the engineer he aspired to become. Calculations for a new type of windmill spread before him, shirt sleeves rolled up despite the heat, his father's old pocket watch carefully placed beside his work. "They're back again," Eleanor said without looking away from the window, as she continued to track the rider's movement. William tensed but didn't raise his eyes from the drawings. "A fourth pass this week," he noted, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sheriff Donovan says they're just passing through, heading to the new Silver Strike near Black Mesa." "Is that what he says?" Eleanor's voice carried a careful neutrality that anyone who truly knew her would recognize as dangerous. She set her coffee down and pulled a chair across from her son. And you believe that? William finally looked up, meeting his mother's steady gaze. Mother and son shared the same deep-set hazel eyes, though William's reflected the straightforward honesty of a young man who'd spent his life working with practical problems of water and earth. Eleanor held something harder, something that seemed to evaluate and calculate on a level beyond simple mathematics. Could you recognize the signs of someone with a dangerous past hiding beneath a peaceful exterior? No, he admitted. Not after what happened to the Bartlett family last month, or the threats to Wilson's General Store. But what else can we do? The water rights are already filed with the territorial office. Eleanor's face remained impassive, but her mind was cataloging, processing, planning. The water rights claim had been William's idea, a legal declaration documenting their ownership of the crucial spring that fed not only their ranch, but potentially the entire Eastern Valley. William had surveyed the land, drawn the maps, and presented evidence to the territorial office. It was the act of a good son, a man who believed in the system and progress. It was also the act of a man who didn't truly understand the nature of the predators circling their small ranch. We could withdraw it, William suggested, though his tone indicated he already knew her answer. It's not about the water rights, Eleanor replied, her voice carrying an edge she rarely allowed herself. The Shadow Creek Gang has bought or intimidated their way into controlling every water source along the Eastern Territory. This legal challenge is just slowing them down. She moved to a hand-drawn map of the territory that hung beside an old family photograph. Eleanor, William, and Michael standing in front of their newly built ranch house 7 years ago. Her finger traced the route of the old wagon trail that cut through the northern part of the territory. Perfect route for moving stolen silver, she said quietly. Connects to the railroad, minimal law enforcement presence, good sightlines for spotting trouble. Her assessment was automatic, professional, the kind of evaluation she'd performed countless times in her former life. Would you have suspected this widow possessed such tactical knowledge? William watched his mother with a mixture of concern and curiosity. After Michael's death, Eleanor had disappeared for nearly 4 months, only occasionally sending word that she was alive. When she'd returned, something had changed in her, something harder, more focused, as if she'd come back with a purpose beyond simply reclaiming her husband's property. You sound like you've given this a lot of thought, he observed carefully. Eleanor's expression shifted into something more casual, more aligned with the ranch widow she appeared to be. Just thinking out loud. Your father always said to understand outlaws, you have to think about what they want and what they're willing to do to get it. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, not the single riders from earlier, but multiple mounts, heavy and purposeful. Eleanor moved to the window with fluid efficiency, her stance changing subtly. William wouldn't notice the transition, but in that moment the widow became something else entirely. A predator assessing threats. 3 riders approached the house, each bearing the distinctive blood-red bandanas of the Shadow Creek Gang. The center horseman pulled ahead, a man whose very posture spoke of casual violence and absolute authority. Jackson Blackwood, leader of the Shadow Creek Gang, former Confederate cavalry officer suspected of orchestrating a criminal operation that stretched across 3 territories. He transformed a small gang of deserters into a sophisticated network dealing in protection rackets, water rights control, and silver theft. His appearance at the Sullivan Ranch wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. How would you react if danger rode straight to your doorstep? Stay inside, Eleanor told William, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had once commanded field hospitals during the bloodiest battles of the war. Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay inside. William started to protest but fell silent at the look in his mother's eyes. In that moment, he glimpsed something beneath the widow's exterior, something that seemed both foreign and strangely familiar, as if he was seeing a version of his mother he'd somehow always known existed but had never directly witnessed. Eleanor stepped onto the porch as the 3 riders came to a halt in the yard. She noted how they positioned themselves, automatically cataloging their stance. The way their hands rested near their holstered weapons, the manner in which their eyes constantly scanned for threats. These weren't simple cowboys or common bandits. These were men with training, probably military backgrounds. Mrs. Sullivan, Blackwood called out, his voice carrying a practiced charm that didn't reach his eyes. Beautiful morning for a visit. Eleanor's posture subtly shifted into something non-threatening, something that projected vulnerability and uncertainty. The exact image of a widow uncomfortable with unexpected visitors. "This is private property, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her tone polite but cautious. Blackwood smiled, removing his hat with theatrical precision. He was in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years under the desert sun. His eyes, however, were cold and calculating, constantly evaluating. Have you ever encountered someone whose courteous manner couldn't hide their dangerous nature? That's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you, Mrs. Sullivan. The property, he gestured expansively. My organization has development plans for this region. Plans that could benefit everyone, including you and your boy. Eleanor noted how his companions subtly spread out, trying to establish dominant positions around the porch. An amateur move. They were telegraphing their intentions to anyone trained to see it. "We're not interested in selling," she replied, maintaining her role as a simple ranch widow. "This property has been in my husband's family for generations." Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Things change, Mrs. Sullivan. Progress comes whether we want it or not. Smart folks adapt." He shrugged, his vest shifting to momentarily reveal the handle of a pistol holstered at his side. "Others, they tend to get left behind, sometimes tragically." Eleanor allowed a flash of fear to cross her face, feeding their assumptions. Let them think they were dealing with a simple widow and her idealistic son. Let them underestimate her. It's what she'd been planning for months. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, allowing a tremor to enter her voice. "Threatening?" Blackwood spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm offering you a way forward. $5,000, well above market value, because I respect what you and your boy have here." His voice hardened slightly. "But that offer won't last forever, especially with all these legal complications your son seems intent on pursuing." The mention of the water rights confirmed what Eleanor already knew. The writers had sources within the territorial office, possibly within the sheriff's department itself. The corruption ran deeper than even William had suspected. What would you do if you discovered corruption reached into the very institutions meant to protect you? Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, the picture of intimidated vulnerability. I'll need to discuss this with my son." Blackwood's smile returned, satisfied that his message had been delivered effectively. He reached into his jacket, making one of his companions tense nervously. Eleanor filed that away. The man wasn't used to real violence, just intimidation. Blackwood produced a folded paper, holding it out. Eleanor stepped forward to take it, letting them see her slight tremor. Inside, she was counting weapons, analyzing stances, noting how each man carried himself. Everything told her these weren't just outlaws. Their quasi-military bearing, the disciplined spacing, the coordinated approach, all suggested connection to something bigger, something more organized than a typical gang. 3 days, Mrs. Sullivan," Blackwood said as he mounted his horse. "Time enough to make the sensible choice." Their hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving Eleanor standing on the porch. She waited until they were out of sight before her demeanor changed completely. The trembling stopped. Her posture shifted subtly, center of gravity lowering, weight balanced perfectly. This was the stance that had made her a legend in field hospitals, the physician preparing to hunt. William emerged from the house, his face pale with concern. "Ma, what do we do?" Eleanor turned to her son, letting him see for the first time the steel beneath her quiet smile. "It's starting," she said softly. "They're getting ready to move on something big, something worth killing for." "Wake one!" She looked down at Blackwood's paper, a slow, dangerous smile forming. "And they just invited a ghost to their party." Have you ever discovered hidden strength within yourself when facing impossible odds? Inside the ranch house, on a table tucked in the corner of Eleanor's bedroom, sat a small collection of journals. They weren't family records or recipe books, but detailed notes on botanical compounds, their effects on the human body, and precise dosages. Beside the journals lay a worn medical kit, not from the local doctor, but from the Union Army Medical Corps, and a single faded photograph with the inscription, Field Hospital at Antietam, September 1862. The widow of Providence Springs was much more than she appeared, and the Shadow Creek gang had just made the mistake of threatening the only family she had left. Providence Springs hadn't changed much in the years since Eleanor had last called it home. The single, dusty street still housed the same struggling businesses, though now most sported fresh bullet holes and hastily repaired windows. Silent testimony to the Shadow Creek gang's growing influence. Eleanor steered her weathered wagon outside Wilson's General Store, noting 3 saddled horses clustered near the hitching post. Shadow Creek horses. She recognized the distinctive Spade brand. Inside, she could hear raised voices. Sarah Wilson's store had been in her family since the town's founding. Now it was about to become another kind of battlefield. Would you have the courage to walk into danger to help a friend? Inside Wilson's General Store, 2 Shadow Creek riders flanked the counter where Sarah Wilson stood, her face pale but determined. The third, wearing a lieutenant's badge identifying him as Kevin Slater, leaned forward menacingly. "Protection payments ain't optional anymore, Sarah," Slater growled. "Town's changing. Be a shame if something happened to this place." Eleanor selected a shopping basket, moving quietly through the aisles. Her presence registered. She saw the nearest rider's hand twitch slightly toward his holster. Ex-military or lawman, that telltale gesture. More evidence something bigger was happening with the Shadow Creek riders. "I've already paid the business association," Sarah's voice carried clearly, strained but resolute. "Sheriff Donovan says." "Sheriff ain't in charge anymore." Slater swept a display of local honey onto the floor. "We are. $100 a month starting today." Eleanor rounded the aisle, her basket filled with normal ranch supplies. She kept her movements deliberate, unthreatening. Just another frontier widow doing her shopping. "Oh my," she said mildly, stepping in the sticky honey. "What a mess. Sarah, do you have a mop? I'd be happy to help clean up." The riders turned, irritation crossing their faces. Slater started to speak, but Eleanor was already moving past them to the counter. "Adding these to my monthly account," she said cheerfully. "And I'll need a pound of that new coffee you got in, the one from San Francisco. William says it's amazing." Sarah blinked, then caught on. "Of course, Eleanor. I'll get that from the back. Take your time." Eleanor smiled at the riders. "I'm sure these gentlemen were just leaving, weren't you, boys?" Slater stepped closer, using his bulk to intimidate. "This ain't your business, lady." "No?" Eleanor's smile remained pleasant, but something shifted subtly in her eyes. Later, Slater would try to explain to his brothers what he saw. Something cold, something that triggered instincts he'd learned in combat. "My husband's family helped build this town. Sarah's grandfather saved my son's life during the fever outbreak 2 summers ago, so maybe it is my business." She turned back to her shopping list, dismissing them. The insult was deliberate, calculated. Slater's face reddened, his hand twitching again toward his holstered pistol. "You should be careful, Mrs. Sullivan," he growled. "Accidents happen." Eleanor didn't look up from her list. "Yes, they do. Like 3 weeks ago when your man Dawson had that nasty fallout by Eagle Creek, the one that wasn't reported." Now she met his eyes. "Funny thing about accidents. You never know who might have seen something." The riders exchanged glances. That incident hadn't been reported because it happened during a late-night silver shipment. No one was supposed to know about it. How would you react if a seemingly helpless widow revealed she knew your darkest secrets? "We'll finish this later," Slater told Sarah, trying to salvage some authority, but his voice had lost its edge. After they left, Sarah sagged against the counter. "Thank you, Eleanor, but you shouldn't have. They're dangerous." "Yes, they are," Eleanor began, cleaning up the honey with practiced efficiency. "And they're getting more organized. That's what worries me." Sarah got the mop. "Sheriff Donovan says they're just passing through. Part of some big operation moving south next month." "Is that what he says?" Eleanor's voice was carefully neutral. "Interesting, because that's not what his deputy told Elena Mason when they tried to pressure her into selling last month." She worked in silence for a moment, letting Sarah process the implications. The storekeeper was smart. She'd see the pattern. "They're buying up all the land with water access," Sarah said slowly, "or forcing people to sell. But why? It's just desert territory." "Maybe," Eleanor finished mopping. "But it's also the most direct route between the new Silver Strikes and the railroad. Lots of empty land. No cavalry patrols in some spots. Perfect for moving things that need to stay off the main trails. Sarah's eyes widened. You think there's... I think, Eleanor interrupted gently, that you should take a vacation. Visit your sister in Tucson for a week or two. I can't. The store... Eleanor's voice was soft but carried absolute authority. Please, things are about to change in Providence Springs. When they do, it's better if certain people aren't around to see it. Outside, Eleanor loaded her supplies into her wagon. As she climbed onto the seat, she noticed a folded paper tucked beneath the reins. A crude drawing of a gravestone with Sullivan scrolled across it. An amateurish threat, but it confirmed her suspicions. The Shadow Creek riders were getting nervous, pushing harder, which meant they had a deadline. Something big was coming. Would you recognize the signs that your enemies were becoming desperate? She drove to the outskirts of town, pulling onto a rocky overlook. From here, she could see Eagle Creek stretching south toward the border. 8 years ago, she had been investigating reports of poisoned water sources during a Navajo uprising. The investigation had led to Montana territory before her superiors suddenly reassigned her. Now, the Shadow Creek gang was securing water rights along the same route. Her wagon creaked as she reached beneath the seat, removing a small wooden box. Inside lay 6 glass vials filled with clear liquid, each labeled with precise measurements. 3 empty spaces showed where vials had been removed. Eleanor smiled as she checked her work. Everything was progressing exactly as planned. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon as she headed home. In her rear view, she caught glimpses of a rider following at a discreet distance. Amateur surveillance. They were watching her while she watched them. Perfect. Everything was falling into place. The physician was about to remind the territory why battlefield surgeons still whispered her name with a mixture of awe and fear. But first, she had to give the Shadow Creek riders exactly what they wanted. One seemingly vulnerable widow and her idealistic son. The perfect targets. The perfect trap. Eleanor smiled as she drove. Some predators, after all, hunt best from inside the den. What would you do if you knew your enemies were watching your every move? Inside Eleanor's bedroom lay secrets few in Providence Springs could imagine. Beneath floorboards worn smooth by years of careful steps, she retrieved a leather-bound journal. Its pages weren't filled with a widow's grief, but detailed formulas written in a surgeon's precise hand. Dosages, symptoms, times of deterioration. Eleanor's fingers traced the latest entry dated 3 weeks prior. 3rd delivery to Eagle Creek, gradual onset beginning. Estimated full effect 20-30 days. Eleanor closed the journal and pulled from her apron pocket the folded paper Blackwood had given her. It wasn't just a deed of sale, as she'd expected, but a crudely drawn map marking a meeting point at Serpent's Pass, a narrow canyon 10 miles north of town. The paper carried a faint medicinal smell, and Eleanor held it to her nose, her eyes narrowing in recognition. Laudanum. Blackwood was a user, another weakness to exploit. A sharp knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor slid the journal back into its hiding place and adjusted her posture to once again become the grieving widow. William had already answered the door by the time she reached the main room. Dr. Harrison, she greeted, genuine warmth in her voice for the first time that day. What brings you out this far? The elderly doctor stood in their doorway, his medical bag clutched tightly in gnarled hands. At 70, Robert Harrison had been the territory's only doctor for nearly 30 years. His eyes, still sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows, darted nervously around the room. Eleanor, William, he nodded, stepping inside and lowering his voice. I needed to warn you. 3 more Shadow Creek men came into my surgery last night. Stomach cramps, bloody flux, weakness. Makes 7 this month. William closed the door, concern etching his features. Is it spreading through the town? That's just it. Harrison shook his head. It's only affecting Shadow Creek men, only those who drink from Eagle Creek. His eyes locked with Eleanor's. The symptoms? They're consistent with certain botanical toxins, the kind you researched during the war. A heavy silence filled the room. Eleanor's expression remained carefully neutral, but William looked between them with dawning comprehension. Mother? He questioned, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor gestured for them both to sit. The time for some truce had come. Robert was more than just our doctor, William. During the war, he supervised my work with the medical corps at Antietam and Gettysburg. Your mother, Harrison said, placing his bag on the table, was the finest botanical specialist in the entire Union Army. She saved thousands with her medicinal compounds. He paused, and eliminated certain threats with the same knowledge. William stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Would you be able to recognize the difference between justice and revenge in your darkest hour? The water at Eagle Creek is being slowly contaminated, Eleanor confirmed, her voice steady. Not enough to kill yet, just enough to weaken, to create uncertainty, to make them vulnerable when the time comes. Shani, Blackwood's offering to buy our ranch because we control the only clean water source left that feeds his hideout, William realized, his engineer's mind quickly calculating the implications. But it means they'll come for it regardless, Eleanor said. The offer is merely a formality. When we refuse, they'll take more direct action. And you've been planning for this all along, William said, a statement rather than a question. Since the day they murdered your father, Eleanor confirmed. Blackwood didn't recognize me from the war. Few would connect the widow Sullivan with the physician who served General McClellan. Harrison opened his medical bag, removing a small amber bottle. I brought more foxglove extract as you requested. But Eleanor, I must urge caution. What you're attempting is justice, she finished firmly. Not revenge, Robert. Justice. And the doctor sighed, the weight of his years showing in the slump of his shoulders. The Shadow Creek gang has the sheriff in their pocket. 3 territorial marshals have disappeared investigating them. What makes you think? I don't plan to arrest them, Robert. Eleanor's laugh held no humor. William stood abruptly, pacing the small room. This is madness. We should leave. Sell the ranch. Start somewhere new. Oh, and let them continue. Eleanor's voice remained calm but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Let them take the next family's land, the next husband's life, the next child's future. They won't stop, William. Men like Blackwood never do. Before William could respond, the distant sound of galloping hooves drew their attention. Eleanor moved to the window, her body instantly alert. Shadow Creek rider, she reported. Coming fast. Alone. I should go. Harrison gathered his bag. No. Eleanor's command stopped him. Stay inside with William. This might be important. Eleanor stepped onto the porch as the rider skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust. She recognized him as Jeb Carter, one of Blackwood's younger recruits, barely 20, with a perpetual look of nervous energy. Mrs. Sullivan, he panted, not bothering to dismount. Mr. Blackwood sent me. There's been a change of plans. What kind of change? Eleanor allowed a tremor of fear to enter her voice. He wants to meet with you and your boy tonight. Neutral ground, the old mission church, to finalize the sale. Carter's eyes darted around nervously. 8 o'clock. Come alone. We haven't agreed to any sale, Eleanor protested. Blackwood says you will, Carter replied, already turning his horse. Says to tell you he's not a patient man. 8 o'clock. He spurred his mount, disappearing in another cloud of dust. What would you do if faced with such a dangerous ultimatum? Eleanor remained on the porch long after he'd gone, her mind working through the implications. When she finally returned inside, her expression had hardened into something that made even Harrison step back. It's happening faster than I anticipated, she said. They're desperate for clean water. The symptoms are accelerating. What will you do? William asked. Eleanor moved to the fireplace, retrieving a hidden derringer from behind a loose brick. Spring the trap early. Eleanor, no, Harrison pleaded. It's too dangerous. Blackwood never meets anyone without at least 6 men hidden nearby. I'm counting on it. Eleanor checked the small pistol with practiced hands. William, I need you to ride to Fort Buchanan. Find Captain Reynolds. He served with your father. Tell him exactly what I told you to say if this day ever came. Suresh to worry. The message about settling accounts? William asked, his face pale. Eleanor nodded. He'll understand. Robert, I need you to prepare your surgery for multiple patients. Eleanor, the doctor began. Not for the Shadow Creek men, she interrupted. For the townspeople who might get caught in what's coming. A heavy silence fell over the room as the full scope of Eleanor's plans began to dawn on both men. You've been preparing for this since before you returned, William said slowly. The herbs you've been growing, your trips to Eagle Creek, The old army contacts you've been writing to? Yes, Eleanor admitted simply. How many Shadow Creek men are there? William asked. 27, Eleanor replied without hesitation. 17 at their main camp near Eagle Creek. 6 usually patrol the territory. 4 stay with Blackwood. William exchanged a glance with Harrison. The level of intelligence she'd gathered was unsettling. And you've been poisoning their water supply for how long? Harrison asked quietly. 3 months. Gradual doses building slowly. By now, most of them can barely stay in the saddle for more than an hour. Their aim is compromised, their judgment clouded. That still leaves 27 armed men, William protested. Eleanor's smile was cold. 24 as of this morning. 3 are already in the ground behind their camp. Ah! William stared at his mother, truly seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the woman who'd baked bread and tended garden throughout his childhood. This was someone else entirely. Someone forged in battlefield hospitals and refined by personal tragedy. How far would you go to protect your family and bring justice to those who've wronged you? The abandoned mission stood silhouetted against the setting sun, its bell tower crumbling from years of neglect. Built by Spanish missionaries a century earlier and abandoned during Apache raids, it now served as neutral ground between the scattered ranches. Eleanor approached alone on horseback, her widow's black dress replaced by practical riding clothes, her hair tightly bound beneath a plain hat. She appeared unarmed, but William knew better. His mother carried death in every fold of her clothing, every pocket, perhaps in the very touch of her hands. From his hidden position among rocks overlooking the church, William watched through his father's old spyglass. Despite his mother's instructions to ride for Fort Buchanan, he couldn't leave her to face this alone. What he saw chilled him to the bone. Blackwood hadn't come with just 4 men. At least a dozen Shadow Creek riders surrounded the mission, positioned behind crumbling walls and atop the bell tower. It wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. Eleanor dismounted calmly, tying her horse to a hitching post as if arriving for Sunday services. If she noticed the hidden men, she gave no indication. Mrs. Sullivan, Blackwood's voice boomed from the church doorway. Welcome. I see you came alone. Wise decision. Mr. Blackwood, Eleanor acknowledged, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. I see you didn't. Blackwood chuckled, stepping into view. Even from a distance, William could see the man looked unwell. His face was pale, his normally immaculate appearance now disheveled. The poison was working. Simple precautions, Blackwood gestured vaguely. I'm disappointed your boy didn't join us. William is considering your offer, Eleanor replied, stepping closer. He's young, idealistic. He believes in legal proceedings and territorial law. And you don't? Blackwood raised an eyebrow. I believe in more immediate solutions, Eleanor said. That's why I came with a counteroffer. Blackwood's interest visibly piqued. I'm listening. Eleanor reached slowly into her pocket, removing a small leather pouch. Your men are sick, Mr. Blackwood. The water at Eagle Creek doesn't agree with them anymore. But I can fix that. Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily. You know about that? I know many things. Eleanor opened the pouch, revealing dried herbs. This will purify your water, eliminate the sickness. In exchange, you leave our ranch alone. You expect me to believe a ranch wife knows about water purification? Blackwood scoffed, but William could see the desperate interest in his eyes. I expect you to recognize an opportunity when you see one, Eleanor replied calmly. Your men are dying, Mr. Blackwood. 3 already in the ground, if my count is correct. How many more can you afford to lose? Blackwood's hand moved to his stomach unconsciously. Another symptom. And how do I know this isn't some trick? Eleanor smiled. Because I'll demonstrate. Bring me water from Eagle Creek. I'll drink it first, then purify the rest. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face. He hadn't expected this turn. Johnson, he called to one of his men, bring the water skin. William watched in horror as his mother's plan unfolded. She knew exactly how desperate these men were, how the mysterious illness was decimating their ranks. She was using their fear against them. What would you do if you saw a loved one walking directly into danger? As Johnson approached with the water skin, Eleanor's eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in each hidden gunman's position. William knew she was counting, calculating, preparing. Before we proceed, Eleanor said, her voice suddenly harder, You should know that I've already treated the water at 3 other points along Eagle Creek. Your men at the main camp drank the antidote with their morning coffee. Blackwood stiffened. What are you saying? I'm saying, Eleanor stepped closer, no longer playing the role of intimidated widow, that I'm the reason your men are sick, and I'm the only one who can save them. A deadly silence fell over the mission grounds. Blackwood's hand hovered near his pistol. Who are you? He demanded, his voice barely controlled. They called me the physician during the war, Eleanor replied, and William saw recognition dawn in Blackwood's eyes. McClellan's witch, he whispered, his Confederate background revealing itself. They said you could kill a man with a handshake, cure gangrene with a poultice, identify poison with a single sniff. They said a lot of things, Eleanor agreed. Not all of them exaggerated. Blackwood drew his pistol, but his hand shook visibly. Why reveal yourself now? Because tonight is when it ends, Eleanor said simply. One way or another. Say. William raised his rifle, preparing to fire if Blackwood threatened his mother. But something in her posture told him to wait. She was still in control. You poisoned an entire water supply, Blackwood said, a hint of admiration in his voice despite himself. Just to get to me. No, Mr. Blackwood, Eleanor corrected. I poisoned one water supply to save dozens of families from your particular brand of progress. Your death is merely a bonus. Blackwood's laugh turned into a cough, flecks of blood appearing on his hand. Even if you kill me, my men will tear you apart. Your men, Eleanor glanced at the increasingly nervous riders emerging from hiding, are dead. They just don't know it yet. The final stage began this morning when I increased the dosage. Without the antidote, none of you will see tomorrow's sunset. The mission grounds erupted in panic as Shadow Creek men realized the full implications of her words. Some drew weapons, others backed away in fear. Kill her! Blackwood shouted, raising his pistol. But Eleanor was already moving, the small derringer appearing in her hand as if by magic. Her first shot caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second hit the water skin, spilling its contents into the dust. The only water source free of poison is at my ranch, Eleanor announced as chaos erupted around her. Surrender now, and you might live. William watched in awe and terror as his mother, the quiet widow, the gentle healer, the woman who had tucked him in at night with stories of faraway places, became death incarnate before his eyes. The battle for Providence Springs had begun, and Eleanor Sullivan had just revealed her true self to the very men who had underestimated her for far too long. How would you feel if you discovered the person you thought you knew had been hiding such extraordinary capabilities? In the 5 years that followed the Battle of Providence Springs, as the townspeople now called it, the legend of Eleanor Sullivan grew despite her best efforts to return to a quiet life. The Shadow Creek gang had been utterly destroyed that night, some killed in the chaotic gunfight at the mission, others captured by Captain Reynolds' cavalry troops who arrived just in time, led by a determined William who had ignored his mother's instructions. Blackwood himself had survived his wound, only to face a military tribunal for his crimes during and after the war. The gold shipment he had stolen during the conflict had been recovered from its hiding place in Serpent's Pass, and justice had finally been served for the medical personnel massacred at Meadow Creek Hospital 13 years earlier. Eleanor's clinic now stood at the center of a thriving Providence Springs, where once she had hidden her medical knowledge, she now used it openly, training a new generation of frontier doctors alongside Dr. Harrison. Her botanical garden behind the clinic produced medicines that were sought after throughout the territory, and the irrigation system William had designed ensured that clean water flowed to every corner of the growing town. On this particular evening, Eleanor sat on the clinic's porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The territorial governor was due to visit the following day, ostensibly to present her with a medal she had refused 3 times already. Politicians, it seemed, were nearly as persistent as outlaws. They're still telling that story, you know, William said, stepping onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee. Now 24, he had grown into a respected engineer whose water management systems were being implemented across the territory. Which one? Eleanor asked, though she already knew. About the widow who poisoned the Outlaw's water supply before they kidnapped her son, William smiled, handing her a cup. I heard 3 different versions at the railroad station today. In one of them, you single-handedly killed 40 men with nothing but a hat pin and a bottle of medicine. Eleanor shook her head, a mixture of amusement and resignation in her eyes. Legends rarely care about the truth. And what is the truth, Mother? William asked, settling into the chair beside her. After all this time, I still wonder which parts of you are real, the healer or the avenger. Eleanor considered the question, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Both, she said finally. Always both. The same knowledge that can heal can also harm. The same hands that nurture can destroy if needed. She turned to her son, the evening light softening the lines that years of frontier life had etched on her face. The difference is in the choice we make each day. After your father died, I chose vengeance. But now, her gaze drifted to the town below, where lamps were being lit in windows, families gathering for evening meals, children being called in from play, the ordinary precious rhythm of peaceful lives. Now I choose this, she said simply. Every day I choose this. William nodded, understanding. The legend would continue to grow, changing with each telling around campfires and in saloons across the territory. The widow and the poison water, the physician's revenge. But here in this moment sat just a mother and son, watching darkness fall and finding, after everything, a measure of peace. Do you ever regret it? William asked quietly. What you did to Blackwood and his men? Eleanor's eyes held the distance for a long moment before she answered. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that our world sometimes demands such choices, but I do not regret protecting what was ours, or bringing justice where the law could not. She reached over and squeezed her son's hand, and I will never regret the life we've built from the ashes of that night. Below in Providence Springs, a church bell rang, calling the faithful to evening services. Life continuing, healing, growing, perhaps the greatest victory of all. For what had begun as a tale of vengeance had transformed, like Eleanor herself, into something more enduring. A story of renewal, of justice served not only through retribution, but through the harder, quieter work of rebuilding what was broken. As darkness enfolded the Montana territory, the legend of the widow who poisoned the outlaws' water would continue to be whispered around campfires. But here on this porch, the woman behind the legend simply sipped her coffee and watched over the town she had saved, finding in its peaceful rhythms the redemption she had sought all along. Would you have the courage to face your darkest self and then find your way back to the light? Music swells. Camera pulls back to wide panoramic shot of Montana landscape. The Old West wasn't won just by men with six-shooters and badges. It was built by the unsung heroes, the women with steel in their spines and secrets in their medicine cabinets. Eleanor Sullivan fought not just for vengeance, but for something we Vietnam veterans, Korean War soldiers, and children of the greatest generation understand deep in our bones. The sacred duty to protect home and family by any means necessary. They don't make them like Eleanor anymore. Back when America knew what it stood for. Back when good meant good and evil got what was coming to it. Back when justice wasn't about courtroom technicalities but about setting things right. In these troubled times of today, with politicians talking double and crime in our cities, perhaps we need to remember the lesson of Providence Springs, that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the loudest gun, but the quietest determination. The legend of the physician reminds us that true American grit comes in many forms. Sometimes it wears a badge, sometimes it carries a rifle, and sometimes it pours you a glass of water with a smile that conceals everything you need to know. If you enjoyed this true tale of frontier justice, hit that subscribe button. Next week, we'll bring you the story of the Medal of Honor winner who returned from World War II to find outlaws had taken over his hometown and the hell he unleashed to reclaim it. Deep voice. This has been American Legends, where history meets justice and the good guys still win.